When I was in college, I developed a bad habit. No, not alcohol or drugs. Something far tamer than those. I developed a habit of sleeping in class. You see, it seemed as though every single class I had fell right after a meal. Breakfast, then computer science. Lunch, then general biology. Dinner, then statistics. As a result, I tended to drift off as the professors lectured. However, it was an incident that occurred during that last class that finally broke me out of the habit for good. Most of my classes were held in lecture halls at the Science Center, a large, multi-storied concrete building with little way of decor. From the outside, it looked more like a parking garage or a penitentiary than an educational facility. Inside wasn't much better. A drab, featureless interior full of the same bland concrete walls and dull fluorescent lighting. Only a small area on the third floor dedicated to offices for various staff had anything that added color to the place. One evening, after a meal from the student union, I sat in the back row of my statistics course, feeling the tug of my eyelids as the professor droned on down in the front of the auditorium as my stomach digested my dinner. You never notice yourself going to sleep unless you're actively fighting it. And I was not one to wage war on myself, so it wasn't long before I was out, my chin in my hands, my pen dangling from my fingertips, hunched over a notebook full of scribbles. It wasn't unusual for the teachers to notice when somebody was snoozing in the middle of the lecture. Half of the time it seems like they didn't care. They're not paid to wake you up after all. If you're not paying attention, they're not going to suffer a pay cut when you flunk out. But some still take a moment to call your name, try to snap you out of it. So when I heard my name being called in the middle of sleep's dark embrace, I quickly snapped to attention and responded, yes? My face got really hot, anticipating the laughter of the other students, but the moment quickly faded as I realized I was sitting alone in a dark and empty classroom. Looking at my watch, I realized that I actually managed to doze off through the entire hour, and then some. And it was already past 9 o'clock. Nobody had bothered to wake me, either as a joke or out of sheer obliviousness. And I sat there wondering, who called my name? I could still hear the voice in my head, leaving me to wonder if maybe it's just been a dream. But then the voice came again. It was low, echoing in the empty room. Clearly not my imagination. The auditorium was dark, but I could still make out much of the interior and empty seats from the smidgen of yellow light that came through one of the exits, especially from my position on the top back row. "Hello?" I called out into the empty blackness. Several steps down and to my left something shuffled, moving along the row of seats. I couldn't see it, but from the sound of it, it seemed to be coming my direction. Instinctively, my heart started racing and I stood up, fumbling in the dark to find my books and just get the hell out of there. My pen fell to the floor and rolled off down the edge of the level I was on, and for the briefest of moments I had the insane thought that I needed to go get it. But then the shuffling stopped and the room went quiet, and I stood frozen in my spot, holding my breath and feeling my heart beating in my ears. It felt like minutes went by standing in the uncanny silence. I swear the only sound seemed to be the faint ticking of my watch. The need to move, the need to get out of that room was overwhelming, but some lingering thought in the back of my mind wanted to hear whoever it was, whatever it was, and know that I wasn't going crazy. It obliged, finally breaking the silence by calling my name again. Not with a friendly, curious voice, but one devoid of any emotion, like a parrot repeating the sounds of its owner, but not knowing what they meant. When I gave no response, it moved. Well, a brushing noise akin to something crawling on their hands and knees. Then it called again. I couldn't hold my breath any longer. I exhaled raggedly, my entire body shaking with fear. It was enough. The shuffling came once again, almost frantically, moving into the middle aisle and then up the steps towards where I stood. Finally, my fight or flight response kicked in. Gripping my books tightly under one arm, I dashed for the other end of the row, nearly tripping over my own feet. Looking back over my shoulder, the room was still incredibly dark, but there was enough contrast between the shadows and the object that I could just make out the form of whatever it was coming up around the desks. It had the appearance of a human being, but its gait seemed more that of a crab, walking on both hands and feet with its knees and elbows bent and its back arched at an agonizing-looking angle. Something about its head also seemed off, the way it bobbed as the thing scuttled. Like it just wasn't fully attached. The nightmare realized that I was on the move and began scrambling up onto the desktops in a beeline straight for me. As it clambered across the row, it started making awful, gibbering sounds with an unnerving excitement to it. Cluck, 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 cluck. I just can't adequately describe the noise, but it put fear of God into me. Any faint notion I had that I was being pranked went right out the window when that thing came at me. I hit the wall hard, bruising my shoulder and tumbling down the steps towards the front of the room. Through the sheer demeanor, I managed to keep myself on my feet and tore out of that classroom without looking back. Nobody was in the hall. In fact, nobody seemed to be in that part of the building at all. And why would they be? There weren't any classes that late at night. And all the offices and study areas were 2 stories up. The exit to the building was dark, almost as dark as the lecture hall, but I didn't care. I bolted out into the crisp night air, startling several people who were walking past. And I didn't stop running until I made it back to my dormitory, where I just hid in my room with the lights on, the door locked, and the shades drawn until my roommate returned. So what was it? I don't really know. My strongest suspicion is based on a story I heard or learned later while I was talking about the incident with a grad student who'd been studying for the school for years. According to her, when the center was first being built, one of the construction workers paving the roof wasn't watching where he was going and stepped on the skylight that happened to be set over a stairwell. He plunged 3 stories, striking the railing several times and landing on his neck, killing him instantly. Whether that story is true or not, I can't be sure. I couldn't find any news articles about the construction accidents, and none of the professors I asked could verify it. Nobody else had described the experience or anything like it either. I tell you what, though, after that, I didn't visit the science center after dark, and I sure as hell will never fall asleep in class again.